I'm going to, we are recording tonight's lecture as well. So we will put it up on our YouTube channel. Hopefully tomorrow I'll get around to doing it. And so that way, if you want to go back and um, share it with anyone else or rewatch it, you'll be able to do that. So thank you, Josie, for joining us tonight. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
All right. Well, thank you for having me. And I'd love, if you think about it, send me a link to that recording because I'd love to share that as well with folks. So, again, my name is Josie. My husband and I have a kennel of sled dogs up here in Fairbanks, Alaska. Um, and so I'll just give you a little background, and we'll jump into kind of the Iditarod and sled dogs and information from there. So I started mushing about 20 years ago. Actually got started down in the lower 48 in northern Idaho. There's quite a bit of mushing outside of Alaska, and I wasn't allowed to have a horse. So I ended up getting into sled dogs and just kind of grew, ended up in Alaska. And last year, completed my first Iditarod, which is, of course, 1,000 miles through Alaska. We've also completed the Yukon Quest and a variety of other races along the way. Instead, we have 30 Alaskan Husky sled dogs in our kennel. And of course, this talk is kind of a great time because the Iditarod is going on. So there's a map you can see here. Now, this map is the typical trail. This year, however, due to low snow, the race started in um, Fairbanks, and so it kind of pulled in. I don't have a pointer, I don't think, to show you, but it came into Ruby on the original route and then added a little kind of loop to get Shagaluk and Anvik and Grayling, all those villages involved in the Iditarod because the race should have been the southern route this year. And then as we speak, the leaders of the race are in White Mountain and they'll be headed to Nome after an 8 hour break. The Iditarod Trail is a historic trail that goes went to Iditarod. That is a ghost town now, but it used to be a bustling mining town. And so this trail, just like a lot of the trails that we run and race on, were historically used for hauling supplies during the gold rush days. And even before then, between the villages and for hunting and things like that, the native peoples used sled dogs. So sled dogs have been used in the north for about 6,000 years. The earliest known use of sled dogs was from Siberia, which of course is not that far from Alaska. And sled dogs were here. They didn't have horses, and sled dogs are able to eat the food that's available. So salmon are, high in fat and oils, and so historically, folks would catch and dry that salmon and feed it to their dogs in the winter, and that allowed them to travel to hunt and subsist in the north. Fast forward to the gold rush days, you had an influx of people, and a lot of these towns and villages are on rivers. And in the summertime, that would be an easy way to get supplies in and out. Horses have a hard time because so much of Alaska is boggy. That tundra is real boggy if you go hiking in it. You can be walking along, but there's tussocks, and then, you step and all of a sudden you're up to your knee. So horses have a hard time. And so in the wintertime, once you get snow on top of that, the ground freezes, you can run a dog team and go quite far. So that's a little bit of history about sled dogs and the Iditarod. So it's all about the dogs. Obviously, I've mentioned that these are Alaskan Huskies a couple times. You can see in my team here, you've got a wide variety. They are not Siberian Huskies or Malamutes that are kind of bred for their cookie cutter looks and size and coloring. Alaskan Huskies are performance bred dogs. So you've got a range of athletic abilities, but everything is kind of, they're bred for their specific love of running. And so it's instinctual with 6,000 years of history. We don't have to teach them how to pull. And so if you're just looking at who's, the best dog in your kennel that's pulling, you end up with a variety of colors. So as you look through the team, you can see, a blue-eyed dog, a red and white dog, black and white browns, just a whole variety of colors. And a couple things that we look at for the dogs as far as breeding and to help them be able to run these long distances is a good coat. A double coat is what protects them, keeps them warm. The ability to eat a lot of food. These dogs will eat up to 12 or even 14,000 calories per day. And they're average about 60 pounds. So you've got dogs that have to be able to eat and consume the calories needed to run along the long races, and then good feet. These dogs, obviously you can see dog booties on these dogs, and that's protecting their feet because dogs sweat through their feet. They also sweat through their mouths, panting. But those dog booties, while they provide protection, there's still a lot of wear and tear, just step after step, just like, long distance runners have to watch their feet. They change their shoes, things like that. So that's another factor. And then the final and possibly one of the more important factors is their mental drive and love of running. So we don't make these dogs run. You can see from this photo, obviously it's the start. They're very excited. They're all smiling, happy. And that is super important as we go down the trail. These dogs love it just as much as we do. And so we're kind of a team out there. And that's the really big thing that sets Alaskan Huskies apart from any other breed. You can train lots of dogs to go run and pull in harness, and there's all kinds of fun things you can do with your dogs in harness, regardless of the breed, if they have an aptitude for it. But the Alaskan Husky, we don't have to train them to do that. So obviously this picture here is from the Iditarod start, but what does it take to get there? It takes years. So sled dogs typically don't start in harness until they're about 8 months old. And so from day one, we're working on building the bond with those puppies. And so that includes puppy walks, spending time with them. You can see here these little guys that were born last year. Their eyes aren't open yet, and we're bringing them inside, hanging out with them and their mama. And just building that bond where they get used to your smell, and that you're gonna be there to protect them and take care of them. You're providing food and comfort if they need it, shelter obviously. So we build a bond with the puppies, and as they get a little older, we start taking them on mini adventures, which are going to simulate what we're going to do when we start running longer distances down the road. And so we take them on free runs. We'll take some bigger dogs and we have them chase us as we're walking or running, or later with a four-wheeler. And we might take them to do all kinds of different adventures before they even run in harness. So training really starts day one, but you're not even in harness until about 8 months old. And then at 8 months, you're going to put the puppies in harness with some older experienced dogs. And I'm very fortunate in the fact that I have a lot of experienced dogs that can train those puppies. So as a human, it's harder for us to train them when they can learn so much better from those older dogs that already know. So once you get your first team trained and they have the manners and temperaments and things that you want, the puppies learn from the adults as far as what's acceptable, what we're allowed to do. And so the first couple of runs are always very exciting. The puppies have been used to going, running loose, and now, they have a harness on and they're next to somebody and there's dogs in front and behind them. So it can be a little crazy, but within about 100 feet down the trail, they hit the front of their harness and they pull. And I'm always amazed by how hard they pull. I always take an extra dog or two and always regret it because I have trouble slowing them down. Once they realize that it's really easy to pull in that harness, they will fly. And so we pretty much focus those first 20 runs or so on just giving everybody a good experience. We'll run, the same trail sometimes, just so they're real confident with running in harness and being hooked in the team and things like that. And then we'll slowly build from there. And as we build up the team into yearlings, those are dogs that are between a year and 2 years old, they'll start to do some longer runs. And now the focus shifts from getting them super comfortable with being in harness to giving them as many different scenarios as possible. So that might mean running under a bridge, over a bridge, crossing roads, crossing rivers, ice, doing tours, passing other teams, um, breaking trail through deep snow. I've had yearlings where, you might take them out and have them go through, a half-mile section of 3 foot deep snow, and I'm going to be out in front of the team walking, just having them follow me, pulling, the sled without me on it. But they learn that, like, oh, we're doing something different. This is kind of weird, but this is kind of fun. And so that's super important. And then as they near that 2 year, they'll turn two, they get to be with the main team, and our actual training for like the Iditarod now can start. So we start in the fall time. You can see here, this is a October run. We usually have snow on the ground at some point in September, October, but sometimes closer to November. So the dogs start pulling a four-wheeler, and that gives me a lot of control over a big team. I have 16 dogs in this team. We'll go up steep mountains, we'll go down. As we go up, I can give it some gas because they're not in as good of shape as they will be. So that helps them not get discouraged by the fact that we're going up a really steep hill. And then on the way down those hills, I can put it in gear, and I can make sure that we're not going too fast, because we're really focused right now on just building muscle and making sure that everyone's learning how to pull hard, and not go too fast, because we want to train these guys to trot at about 8 miles an hour. And that 8 miles an hour is really important later, because as we build up the mileage, regardless of the terrain and trail conditions we're in, if the trail is a good trail, I'm training them to always fall back into that 8 miles an hour. So they might go out of the chute of the Iditarod when they're super excited, and they might go 10 miles an hour, and I'm on the brake trying to slow them down. But within a mile or two, they settle into that comfortable pace. And that's where everyone's just in the zone. They move down the trail. Their heart rates at that point come down because they've trained to that pace. And that means when we stop for a break, they take less time to recover from those runs. So they're incredible athletes, and I'm basically the coach along the way. So fall training turns into winter training. We get on sleds and we start to really log on some miles. And one of the important things with these dogs is they love to run. And so it's important that we still take time out of our training to have fun. So sometimes, like you can see here, we broke the dogs, the 16 Iditarod dogs, into two teams, and I was on the front sled, and then I turn around and I'm moving around with those guys. We might alternate later and have the other dogs run in front, because the dogs like to run with different teams. But we're changing things up, having fun out there, even as we are logging those long miles. And at this point, we're starting to, focus on those long runs with a couple hours of rest and then running again. So we're really getting them ready for the next stage, which is going to be races that are kind of preparatory races for Iditarod. So you could do camping runs just by yourself, go out in the bush for 300 miles, but the dogs, just like myself, if I'm training for, a 5K or 10K or half marathon, it's a lot more fun to go actually do a race. And so the dogs are going to push themselves a little bit more, and that can help me learn more about my individual athletes. And so we'll take them to a race and they'll practice camping. You can see in this photo we've got straw down there. They're learning to wear maybe some gear that we don't always have to use in training. So a dog coat. I want to keep their muscles warm when we stop for a couple hours. So I'll put dog coats on them. They'll learn to sleep in the straw next to other teams. You're going to have teams coming in, going out. You have a vet team that's going to be looking at the dogs at every checkpoint, pre-race, post-race. And so all of that kind of extra commotion, they learn to deal with and be comfortable with before we get to, the main event with the Iditarod. So this is an important part of training, and especially for those 2-year-old dogs. If you've got dogs that are just, 2.5, they're coming into their first season of racing, how they do in these race environments will tell you a lot about your training and that foundation that you gave them. So most of the time, by the time we get to the first race, these dogs are so used to doing random things with us, and they just know that we're going to have fun, and I'm never going to ask them to do something that they can't. And so they usually roll with it, and it's really funny because you'll have a 2 year old and they're acting like they have done races all their life. And then you might have an older dog who's just ballistic because they are so excited we're at a race again. And you can't really tell who's old, who's young. Um, but that's kind of where you want to be in the racing at that point. And then, you've done a lot of training, but there's for distance racing, there's a lot of prep that comes into play. So on the left there, you've got your drop bags. So for the Iditarod, and you'll send out about 1,700 pounds of gear pre-race. And so that gear is the dog's food primarily. Remember, they eat about 12,000 calories a day. So we cut up beef fat and poultry skins and chicken and beaver and fish and bacon and anything that you could think of that a dog might like to eat, as well as kibble and supplements, all goes into those bags. My food goes in there, extra socks, gloves. And then the picture on the right, you can see about 2,000 dog booties. Those are all bundled into the correct sizes and the number that I'm going to need, plus a couple extras for every single leg of the race. And we've also got inside those booties is some foot powder to kind of help dry their feet out, because remember, they're sweating through their feet. So that has vitamin E and some other good things in there just to kind of help keep their feet happy. I also have in the drop bag some ointment, different liniments and massage oils I can use on the dogs if they do have a sore muscle or sore joint. But everything that you need has to be prepped about 2 weeks before the race. And it gets shipped out. So you ship it out to the checkpoints, and hopefully you didn't forget anything, because it all goes out. Um, and then the dogs have their pre-race vet checks. So you can see here they're doing EKGs, they do blood work at the same time. So the dogs are getting a full basically exam with blood work, EKGs, and then right before the race, they do a health check on all of the dogs, focusing more now on joints and muscling and the weight of the dog. Just like an ultra marathoner or an Ironman athlete, these dogs need to be at an ideal weight. You don't want 5 pounds too much on them, because that's going to be hard on them carrying that extra weight. They will lose it, but at the same time, you don't want dogs to be too thin, because we are going out running a long way and they're eating about as much as they can to maintain that weight. So if you start out too thin, you're kind of behind. And then you can see the sled there. It is packed. We call that the rookie bulge. For your rookie run, you kind of take extra non-mandatory gear. You want an extra jacket, an extra, socks and gloves and boots and things like that. So your sled is really full, whether you're a rookie or not, but probably has close to 100, 150 pounds in there at that picture. It got pared down as we went, because you learn there are certain things you just don't need, and then certain things that you wish you had. But that's all part of the learning curve. A couple of things you always have in your sled is a sleeping bag, a cooker to melt snow. So we talked about feeding the dogs. That's a big part of racing, and we melt snow or heat water to boiling, and then we'll mix it with the frozen meat and kibble and kind of make them a nice warm soup. And that's what helps keep them hydrated. But they go for that pretty well, rather than just gnawing on a hunk of raw frozen beef. So the cooker's in there with fuel. You've got snowshoes, an axe, the dog coats, obviously, for when we stop. You might throw straw on top if you're going to be camping between checkpoints, because those checkpoints where you sent out all your gear can be anywhere from 50 to 100 miles apart. So 50 miles, you're probably going to run it in one leg, but 100 miles, you're probably going to be camping out there, depending on your schedule. So that is all of the prep work before the race, and then you get to the start. So you've already not been having probably the most sleep as you get all that prepared and you have the vet checks and everything. And then you head down to Anchorage for the ceremonial start. And it's really just a celebration. Very exciting to kind of get sent off by so many people. Excited about watching these dogs do what they love to do. We have a rider in the sled, so folks bid on the sleds to go for that first 12 miles. And so it's super fun time. As the musher, you can just kind of relax because it's a 12-mile run. You can, chat with your guests the whole way, and it's just really beautiful, especially last year it was sunny and nice. And then you go home, get a good night's rest because the next day you are out on the trail. And once you leave that start line in Willow, or this year it was in Fairbanks, um, it's just you, your 16 dogs, and the gear that you sent out. You're going to see race officials and a vet team at every checkpoint. So there are some people there if you need anything. But pretty much it is just what you sent out. So you and your team, and you start out the first 50 to 100 miles. There's quite a bit of people out there, snow machining or getting out there just to cheer you on. So it still feels like you're around civilization, but you are off the road system. So basically, anywhere from there, if you were to stop and couldn't keep going, you have to get flown back, or mush back, I guess. But so it's just you into the wilderness. Um, as you go through the race, you kind of settle into a schedule. Most mushers are going to run about 6 to 8 hours at a time, and then take a 4 to 6 hour break. That is not a whole lot of sleep for the musher because most of that time is spent getting your dogs bedded down, getting a meal ready, getting their aches and pains taken care of. If a dog's sore, if a dog, you're taking booties off, looking at feet. Um, Once you get all of that done, then you can eat a meal and grab a nap, but then you're going to get ready to go again. And so sleep deprivation starts to kick in. You have obstacles like the Happy River Steps, which is a series of very steep drop offs that on a narrow trail kind of wind around and go down three big drops. And then you climb up a really steep hill that no one talks about because they've always talked about crashing on the steps. You go down the Dalzell River Gorge, you go across the burn where there's almost never any snow down there because there was a fire that went through and it blows the snow away because there's no trees to protect the trail. And then this picture here, this is the Farewell Lakes. And so you're going to run across ice. Um, this is a mixture of glare ice, but there's some snow on top that kind of got packed down so the wind couldn't blow it away, which makes for pretty smooth traveling, but there's no stopping. That little bit of snow is not going to stop your team if you step on the brake. If you try to put your anchors in, they're not going to hold. So you really rely on your dogs and that bond that you've built in the years before starting the Iditarod is all paying off now. Those lead dogs, if you say G, you need them to go right because you can't make them do it. If you say haw, you need them to go haw. And so if you can't see the trail, they can smell it. And so there's times that you may not see any markers telling you which way to go. And so you really rely on your dogs. And the Farewell Lakes here was one of those instances for sure, because you can see it. There is kind of some trail from dog teams ahead of us, but no markers. And so the dogs had to kind of just follow that. And as you travel through all these obstacles, like it's really special how the dogs um, overcome things that you would never see in training. It's impossible to get all the aspects of Iditarod covered in training, even in the years of training, just because there's such a variety traveling 1,000 miles straight across Alaska. So it's really neat to watch the dogs grow and change. As you get past the burn, things get a little bit easier. I think everyone breathes a little easier once you're through that more technical trail that goes over the Alaska range, and then you get into some nicer, calmer trails. You can see here on the left, we were just leaving a camp spot on the side of the trail. We just pulled off, put some straw down, and kind of cuddle up for a couple hours. The trails can be, like this. You can see it's somewhat packed, but it's actually pretty soft once you're moving down the trail. So you're not always going as fast as you would think that you could or should be. It can also be a lot warmer than you might expect as you get out there and you kind of get acclimatized. You'll be out there, and when that sun comes out, it's really hard to stay awake. So sometimes, as the musher, you're just nodding off, and you're like, it's 3 in the afternoon, and it's sunny and nice, and you just want to get some sleep because you are pretty sleep deprived. Um, just like we talked about the mental part for the dogs, their drive and their love of running. For a musher, there's a lot of a big mental aspect to the race because you're the leader of your pack, the leader of the team, and so they're relying on you to take care of them, to not, make good decisions as far as how long to rest, how long to run, and how much to feed them, and um, so all of the training kind of comes into play, your knowledge of your team and the dogs. And here's some more kind of the interior, just again, real nice trail. You can kind of relax in that sunshine. And that's these two runs were afternoon runs. So I was having quite a bit of trouble staying awake. Um, and about 300 to 500 miles down the trail, you get to take a nice 24-hour rest break. And it's up to you where you want to take it. So one of the really cool things about distance racing is there is a lot that's left to the musher's discretion. So you can do what's best for your dogs. You can take your 24-hour rest break. You can camp wherever, however long you want, the rest of the time. And then there's 2 8-hour stops that you have to take in checkpoints. But other than that, it's completely up to you. I took me 10 days to do the Iditarod. So basically, most of that time, I was just reading my dogs like, oh, looks like it's time to stop, or oh, we can keep going a little further, we can do a little longer run. So on the left here, you can see it was kind of snowing, so I had some blankets for the dogs. I'm doing some massage on one of my lead dogs. They've got some snacks there. We try to feed them a couple meals during that break, but mostly I want them to be sleeping, so we make sure they've got some snacks, they get some meals. And they're relaxed, and I basically nap and take care of dogs and feed them, and it's just a cycle. You can see some dogs, the dogs on the right, that's Spears. He was not did not settle too well. He was, every time I'd come out, he'd be up watching me, waiting for me. He obviously wasn't quite ready to take a break, and did not like the blanket. So that was a picture there. It's kind of funny because he just refused. He wouldn't even lay on the blanket. He was fine with straw, but that blanket was scary, I guess. Then we got a couple other dogs relaxing. And when you're in these checkpoints, a lot of them are villages. And so there's kids that come out that you meet, and people just, it's a blast. You feel very, very welcome. Sometimes they'll have moose stew or homemade cinnamon rolls, things like that for you. And when you're eating, frozen pizza and ramen noodles and a lot of protein bars, it's really nice to have some home cooked food and get to visit with people. So that was a really fun part about taking breaks in checkpoints, especially your 24. When you get a little bit more rest, you're probably more coherent than the rest of the time. So a big chunk of the Iditarod is on the Yukon River. This year, there was about 700 miles of river running, not all on the Yukon, but a good chunk of it. And this is typically where it can get really cold. So it was -40. That adds an extra dimension to the dog care and running the dogs. The dogs do incredibly well in cold temperatures. They love it. But as the musher, in order to take care of them, you've got to make sure you layer well. So you've got your, in the photo there, you can see I've got a couple hats and hoods on, a couple jackets. I've got, obviously, my parka is the outer layer with a nice ruff to protect my face. I've got beaver mittens that you can't see in there. and a couple base layers on as well, mucklucks to keep my feet warm. And that is really important. You've got to keep yourself warm. Otherwise, if your fingers are so cold you can't do anything, you're not going to be able to take care of your dog. So, really important to have the gear that you need. And, earlier in the race, it was quite warm. So, getting to the Yukon and then all of a sudden it's boom, 30 below, 40 below, and, within a matter of a couple hours of getting out on the trail, as you sink down into that cold, it's a shock, and you definitely are glad you brought the warm gear with you. Eventually, you climb out of the cold and head into the hills again. You go up and over the mountains into Unalakleet, which is the first village on the coast. So there you can kind of see we're climbing a bit, really pretty and warm. Um, but then you'll climb out of Unalakleet and you get some more hills. So a lot of times after that long section of river running and you climb over to Unalakleet, and then it's kind of flat for a bit, and then all of a sudden you're climbing up and down for about 30, 40 miles. And for the musher, you're kind of like, man, now I have to, run up all these hills. But the dogs get very excited, and there's some really pretty views out there, and pretty neat to be mushing dogs in the winter in those hills, and you smell the salt air. The dogs are always pretty amped. But then you get out of those hills, and you might be excited for the flatter trail, but there's a lot of wind. So with the wind, we don't train on a lot of wind in Fairbanks and other areas that I've lived, and so I wasn't sure how they would do. And so this was really kind of the big test. Is coming out of the hills on our last run into Nome, you could actually see the ground storm. And so you see it, you know that you're going down into it. It's about 4 miles wide, is what we've been told. But there's always stories every year. You never know exactly how bad it is. And you're following the markers. You can see a couple markers in these photos, but that's kind of what you're looking for. And at night, if you have your headlamp on, you can see the reflectors, I feel like, a little bit better than in the daytime. Because in the daytime, yeah, there's some orange paint on there, but it can be obscured a little better. So again, relying on your lead dogs. And in my case, I was really pleasantly surprised that dogs that hadn't hardly seen the wind, they just charged right through it. They no issues. I don't know. I think they kind of had fun in it, which maybe is just because we don't see it a whole lot. And so just one of those areas where the dogs surprise you. And if it was me, being all worried about it, you're trying not to let your dogs know you're worried, and be confident for them. But they did way better than I did. They had no worries and never missed the trail. And then you kind of get towards the finish, the last little bit, still windy, but not quite so bad. You go up and over one last hill, and I was coming in at sunset, so we had a really pretty sunset to welcome us to the finish line. And as finish a long race like this, I think the thing that most mushers will tell you is that you're just so proud of your dogs. It's hard to want it to end. Like, you do want to get back to civilization, but at the same time, you've gotten into such a rhythm, and the dogs that you finished with, you have such a special bond with those dogs, that it's like they read your mind. And so even though you're almost to the finish, I always for the Iditarod, I stopped just a couple miles short and gave him one last snack, and was just kind of pretty exciting time, but also wanted to share that last kind of quiet moment before you get into the finish. Because as you come off the sea ice, you get onto the road, and there's lights, and you're following a police car into the finish line. And you can see the dogs there, obviously all excited, pretty happy. They know what's up. But you'll hang out under the burled arch, obviously get photos, and talk to everyone. They have a vet go through your team, and then you'll have a bag check, again, making sure, you had all your required gear in there. But then after that, after all the photos, you still have to mush down the street just like another block or two to the dog yard where your handler will have some dog crate set up with straw and everything because you're usually in Nome for a couple days with your dogs before you can fly home. And so, you might think that kind of like, you know, I don't know, at least for me, when I finish a running race of some sort, I'm like, oh, I'm done, and you hobble off to the car. But the dogs, they open that gate to go down to the dog yard. And my dogs didn't know where we were going. But I was like, all right. And I had probably 6 or 7 people helping hold back the team because they were just dragging us all down the road. And we did make it to the right spot. But it was pretty incredible. I think that was a really, really special moment just seeing that they had gas left in the tank and were not, if I'd have asked them to keep going, if the race had been 100 miles longer or, 200 miles down the trail still to go, they still would have happily just trotted on down the trail doing what they love to do. Um, and then one last thing I always like to point out too is as a musher, obviously the dogs are the focus, but there's a huge support crew of people that help make it happen. So they often don't get talked about, but you've got people that help make your meals, for your drop bags. And when I finished in Nome, it was just really amazing to see a big group of my support crew that showed up and were just as excited about the dogs and what we had done as I was. So that's one of the really special things I think about mushing as well, especially up here in Alaska. It's kind of like we're a big family, and there's so many people that don't even run dogs, but can't help but get just super excited about by how the dogs love to run and how exciting that is, and to be a part of history. Basically, we're doing the same thing that these dogs have been doing for thousands of years, and the dogs are so excited to go. So that is what I had as far as our presentation. Looks like I've got a little bit of time here for questions. So Valerie, if you want to read if we got any questions, love to answer those.
So go ahead and write your questions in the Q&A if you have any. I have one from Kim. How long is the race? How many days does it take? And how many teams usually participate?
So the Iditarod is 1,000 miles. This year it was 1,130. So the route can vary a little bit depending on where they start the race. Obviously, this year was in Fairbanks, so it was a little longer. So usually right around 1,000. Winning teams are typically doing it in 8 to 9 days. This year it'll be a little longer, so it's actually not finished yet. It took me 10 days, so right about, like I said, 100 miles per day. And that's a pretty good average. But it can take, sometimes 12, 13 days. One of the cool things about mushing in Alaska, especially on the coast, is you could be doing just trotting along, going along fine, but you could quite easily have a storm come up and then the race is shut down for a day or two and you're just waiting for that wind to let up. So there's always that curveball that can be thrown into your plans. But yeah, usually right around 1,000 miles.
Next question. How do they prepare the trail?
So the trail, it's kind of a mix. So with the Iditarod, a lot of the trail is used like on the river between villages. People are using those. So I would say roughly the last third or so, there's not really a whole lot other than putting trail markers in. On a typical year, when we're starting from Anchorage, they have trail breakers go out ahead of the race, and the trail is in as far as, there's usually not going to be tons of trees they need to cut out of the way, things like that. But they'll put those trail markers in that you're going to follow, avoid any obstacles like open water, and things like that. Sometimes they have to build bridges over open water if it's like a stream you've got to cross. And that is about the extent of it. So there's usually some sort of snow machine track that, they've gone over with some snow machines, but it's not groomed. It's not, this nice smooth race track. It can change because of the weather quite a bit. And so they go through, put that trail in, and then right before the race starts, they have a team that the trail breakers that go out ahead of you and try to make sure everything's good. But things can change last minute. And so sometimes they'll have to reroute something last minute. But it's very, very similar to what we train on up here, where a lot of our trails are just put in, by dog teams or by, you might take a snow machine, break them out, and then you go through. And that's why the trail conditions vary a lot, because the weather, you get warm weather and it can get slushy, and you're sinking a bunch, and then it could ice up, get real cold, and it can be hard and fast, and then it snows 6 inches and you're breaking trail. So those are all things that you kind of have to deal with as you're out on the trail as it comes. And sometimes it's different from the front of the pack to the back of the pack. So mushers will talk about how the trail is deteriorating. A lot of the trail that's not traveled regularly, you've got snow machines go over, put a trail in, right? The first couple teams, it freezes up. First couple teams have a crust to run across, but as more and more teams kind of churn it up, if you're 20 teams back, you might have, 6 inches, and then, 30 teams back, you've got a foot, trenched potentially. So that's part of the strategy. And I think that first question was how many mushers she had asked as well. So the
Yeah.
number of mushers varies, but average is probably about 40 to 50. This year, I think there were 34 that started. So COVID's definitely kind of had a factor in the number of teams, but it does fluctuate a bit.
I just have a quick question when you're talking about the mushers. Are there equal number of men versus women, or do you find it predominantly men doing it?
It's about, I think this year there was a third were women. Are usually it is more men than women. But yeah, mushing's probably the only sport where it doesn't matter, like we're all racing against each other. And it also doesn't matter your age and your experience level. So you've got people, like myself. Last year it was my first Iditarod, but I was mushing next to one of my best friends and mentors who's done it 21 times. So it is really unique, and I think really adds to the sport because of that. Because as a rookie, you're running with people that have so much experience, and if you're not too tired, you can like watch and learn, and everyone helps each other out there. So as mushers, if you have something going on, you can, basically go to anyone, you know, whether they're more experienced or not, and they might have some ideas, to help you get down the trail or fix your sled or whatever's going on.
That's great. Okay. Next question. What is the cost to enter the race and to provide the gear? And is there a prize?
So yeah, so there is usually the entry fee is about $4,000. I figured about 40,000 to run the race, including the gear, the food, the transport. You can ship all your gear out, getting home from Nome, things like that. There is some money involved. If you win, I think the purse is like $60,000 for the winner. Um, so it's not a money maker, and no one wins it on their first attempt except for like the first one or two Iditarods. So basically, there is some money, but you end up being out of pocket quite a bit more than what you will make, unfortunately. But it's the adventure of it. So.
How many hours of daylight do you have during the race?
During the race, about 12. It's pretty nice. By the Iditarod, you've got quite a bit of sunshine, usually.
At night, how far apart are the reflective markers? Reflective markers.
It depends on where you're at in the trail. They will put them, really quite close in areas where the trail's known to be windy and bad. Um, And then other areas where you're in the trees and there's no place to get off the trail, you might see one every mile or half mile. So it just depends, but usually they're going to be well within, even if you have your headlamp on, you usually, if you're at one marker, you can see the next one, unless it blows over or something else happens. But typically it's pretty well marked.
Do you rotate the dogs?
So I rotate the dogs in the team. You've got, your lead dogs, obviously up front, team dogs in the middle, wheel dogs are the ones at the very back. I do rotate them in the team, but you're not allowed to rotate dogs like in and out of the team. So when you start the race with 16 dogs, you have to finish with those dogs that started. Now, obviously, as you go 1,000 miles, chances are like 99% chance you're going to have a dog that gets a sore shoulder or doesn't eat enough or a variety of things, right? You've got dogs from all over the world sometimes, and so they could get a stomach bug or something, just a reason you don't want them to continue. You're allowed to return those dogs. So you give them to the vet team and you get them back. They get flown back to Anchorage and you continue on without them. So dog care is super important because the size of the team, bigger team obviously is more power and that's gonna help you move faster down the trail. But at the same time, you have that out. You're not gonna have to carry that dog in the sled for 2 days. But you're not allowed to substitute. So you've got to really know your team and obviously make the right decision for the dog. But know that there's no substituting. And sometimes if you've got, a team that you get towards the end and you have maybe a couple older dogs, because these dogs can race sometimes until they're 10, 11, 12. I mean, it really varies dog to dog. So you might have an older dog that's going to be a little slower, but they have that, the experience to take you through the wind or through some of the obstacles. It's quite possible that you might drop a couple dogs towards the end of the race at the last couple checkpoints just because you want to go faster too. So there's a lot of different reasons why you might not finish with all of them, but not really bad reasons typically. It's always for the dogs so they can come back. And rehab is a huge part of mushing, just like your pro athletes, right? Like they might be out for months for something. And it's the same thing with us. I mean, you have a lead dog that steps wrong and breaks their foot right before a race. I've had that happen. And, that's 6, 8 months that they're not running and they do not like that. But then they come back and they race again, and they're still running strong at 12 years old. So that's kind of, there's always the big picture that we're looking at, even if we're disappointed that they didn't finish, that race.
So you might have answered this other question. How old is the oldest dog that can run? You just mentioned a 12-year-old dog, but I don't.
Yeah, yeah. So one of my friends had a 12-year-old on her competitive team. So it varies. A lot of it does vary based on the size of the dog and their genetics, because certain, bloodlines of dogs just live a little longer. Bigger dogs usually don't have as long of a career because usually they don't live quite as long. Um, but every dog's unique. So I've seen the whole gamut. And I should mention, once they retire from racing, these dogs are still typically running. So in our kennel, we have a couple of retired dogs. Well, we've got, for example, 2 9-year-old dogs. One of them is a big boy. He's retired. I have another 9.5-year-old. She's off on a 50-mile run with my husband right now. And she raced in the Yukon Quest. So you just never know each dog, and they'll let you can pretty much tell when they start to slow down or when they just don't seem as happy about going the long distances. Then they help us train puppies. They do tours and they still run, but they don't have to go long distances anymore.
Do you ever encounter other wildlife?
Yeah, so I always tell people the most dangerous things we find out there are moose and porcupines. Porcupines are usually not a problem when we in the wintertime. It's more of in the summer when I have a lot of loose dogs around hiking and tromping through the woods. But moose can be real difficult. They don't like getting out of the trail. Um, so we give them a wide berth and try to be very careful around them. But there's a lot of other animals out there as well. I mean, you can see in the burn in the Iditarod there are buffalo. I haven't seen them out there. I am sure the dogs smelled them, but I never saw them. But sometimes you'll see them. You can definitely see wolves. Ptarmigan are some little white birds that like to jump up at the last minute out of the snow. They're exciting. But one of my friends saw a wolverine last year. That I would love to see one of those. But pretty much the only thing we worry about are moose.
And I think that was the last question. Um, if anyone has another question, go ahead and quickly type it into the chat. And I don't see anything else popping up. So, well, thank you, Josie. It was wonderful to have you join us tonight. We learned a whole lot. And you have your company up there it's in obviously Fairbanks.
Yeah, so if you guys have other questions or are excited about sled dogs and want to learn more, we have Facebook and Instagrams there back against sled dogs, and we try to post videos and things about what we're doing. And then of course races. And then right now with the Iditarod almost it's drawn to a close. So if you haven't followed that, you can catch the end of it this year. And that would be on the Iditarod website. They've got ways to track and follow the mushers, and it's super cool as well.
Perfect. Another just a comment. Someone just commented, so interesting. So, um, thank you so much. I'm so glad we were able to connect with you and present this. And I guess that's it. Like I said, tonight's session is going to be recorded, so I will put it up on our YouTube channel and I'll send you a link as well, Josie. So, um, thank you again, and everyone have a good evening. And good luck, Josie, with your business and future races.
Yeah, we'll be doing Iditarod next year. So we took a year off this year and did the Yukon Quest, but we'll be back there next year. So
Awesome. All right. Wonderful. All right. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
good night.